My mom always used to say, you argue too much, you talk too much, you'll be a lawyer, and it's a very, I think, Kenyan and African thing, like, you argue so much. Find a niche, find a space for yourself to stand out and be so outstanding that the world conspires for you to find space or for you to thrive in. Part of the benefit I had with working for all those organizations globally, but then also having the exposure and that multicultural experience is you come back home and you see where the gaps are, you see where the pain points are, right? And so for me, it's constantly a question of how do I work towards increasing the impact for the common African? How do we tell our stories? And I know this is amazing for you because you're right at that intersection between tech and communication. We do not tell our stories well, which is very weird and awkward because we are an innately storytelling ecosystem and community. The system is not for us, but things are changing. We get into those spaces and we make it for us, and we find spaces for us to get into and thrive in.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. My name is Alice Kanjejo, your lovely host, and today's guest is very special. I have known her for basically most of, if not all, my life, but it's just been phenomenal to even just know about and hear about her career journey, and very excited to share that with you. I will give her the opportunity to introduce herself. So, June, go ahead.
Thanks, Alice. Thank you for having me as well. I'm a big fan of the podcast. So my name's June Okal. I'm a lawyer by training, and according to the Law Society of Kenya, I work at the intersection of tech, policy, and law. I currently serve at ICANN, which stands for the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, as the senior manager for East and Southern Africa on the global stakeholder engagement team.
That's a long title.
I know, it's a mouthful.
Name. I was reading it over and over, just like, okay, if I was going to say your role.
Yeah.
No, but it's definitely one that seems like it's one of power. But yes, it's very good to have you here and talk about this. So before we get into the gist of that, tell us a bit more about you and your story. Like, where did your interest in not only in law begin, which essentially led into your interest in tech and policy?
Yeah. So unlike most people, I don't have like an aha moment, or a light up in the bulb. My mom always used to say, you argue too much, you talk too much, you'll be a lawyer, and it's a very, I think, Kenyan and African thing, like, you argue so much. So I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer based on that. I enjoyed reading, I enjoyed history in school, learning facts, learning about things and different perspectives. I really enjoyed that. So I knew, law is it. Mm-hmm. So I'm one of those people who knew right from like class 3, 4, I wanted to be a lawyer. So then I just worked through it. And interestingly, our system enables and facilitates, such things in terms of you go to high school, you know what subjects you're doing, at least in the previous system. And then you go to uni. We used to have JAB, the Joint Admissions Board. I think they're now called COOPs or something like that, but university placement essentially by the government of Kenya. Then went into law school, which was at the University of Nairobi. While I was there in my second year, maybe let me backtrack for a bit. When I finished high school, I got into the Equity Leadership Program. So Equity used to have a program, I think they still do, it's actually expanded further, Equity the Bank. They would take students who had performed well in the national examination from across the country, take them into the bank, you work as an intern, and then you join uni after that. And part of the arrangement was that it was set up as a scholarship program. So I'd worked at the bank before I went into uni. Wow. And that was for a year and a half. It was difficult. It was quite a difficult experience for me in terms of the hours, waking up, the work culture. I lost a lot of money and I paid a lot of what we used to call shorts, which is where you pay out money, it doesn't balance in the evening. It used to be very, very
This is
stressful.
Straight out of high school?
Yes, at 17.
And why you in particular to be able to handle this?
Well, you're trained, and their thinking is, or the argument is that you are one of the brightest minds, you should be able to handle this. And people were able to handle it, People did really well. I know people who, because the reality is that we weren't all privileged the same. So I do know friends who supported their families based on that income. They took their siblings to uni and to school and to high school. So it was very impactful. And the intention was very noble, to be honest. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So worked at Equity, we could only wear suits. It had to be a skirt suit. It could only be black, gray, navy blue below the knee. You had to be in the office at the time because branches were a big thing then. It wasn't as digital as it is now. You had to be at the branch by 7. The branch opens at 8. You had to be in by 7 a.m.
Wow.
And by the time you're coming out and leaving the branch, because you're in the back office, it would be like 7 p.m. So you really don't see any sunlight. And I really struggled with that.
That's a lot.
It was. So when I went into uni, I was clear, I need to find a niche and I need to find a space that allows me to thrive that is not so constrained as would typically be in a legal environment.
Yeah, and so that's when you decided to pursue law.
Yes.
Or go back to what you knew you wanted to pursue, which was law.
Yes, and focus on tech.
And focus on tech.
Yes.
Okay, so then when did the interest in tech come into this play of law that you had going on?
Yeah, so how the scholarship program was set up was that anytime you'd be on long holiday, because typically most of us went into public uni and they'd have long holidays. Anytime you're on long holiday, you're supposed to go back to the bank. And it's good because you work, you make money, the salary was decent at the time. But I remember going on long holiday and not wanting to go back to the bank in my second year. And I was literally searching on Google. And then I saw at the bottom of the homepage, there's a section that says About Us and Careers. And then I stumbled on a Google student program. So they used to have what was called a Google Student Ambassador program, where you learn about Google and Google services, Google products, and then you're meant to share that with students on campus. And so I put in an application for that. And I got in. I was the only lawyer in my cohort. What and how it was structured was you'd have different students, like 2 or 3 students per university across sub-Saharan Africa. You go into a sub-Saharan Africa country, you're trained about what the Google products are, you learn more about digital marketing and computer science, and then you come back home and implement events across your campuses. So you teach students about, what's Google Apps, how do you use Gmail effectively, how do you use Google Docs and the like, but then you also learn about AdWords, AdSense, the monetary side of things.
Side note, I think that is also a really, really good way for doing marketing for Google products. Very seamless of them.
Of course, and building a talent pipeline as well.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Like that was very strategic of them too.
It is, and it was amazing. It was a great program because the friends that I met in that program are still my friends to date. This was about 10 years ago.
Wow.
It was also instrumental for me because one of the things they used to say at Google is you don't have to wear a suit to be serious. And they still say it. But that was very contrary for me because number one, I'd worked at the bank. And number two, the legal profession, professional ethics says these are the rules. You can't move or hold your hair this way. Absolutely. Makeup has to be modest,
Yeah.
And then I saw people in T-shirts and jeans, and they were having so much fun, and they were professional. I was like, I'm sold, say less. So when I came back to Kenya, I was very keen on finding a niche area in tech, and that became IP and IT.
Wow. That is a mouthful to even what you've just said. I think the journey from Google and then you coming back home to implement what you learned. I'm just curious to know, you had mentioned in your class you were the only one who did law, which makes me believe that in your law class, not many people were this interested in trying to find this particular niche or going into that space.
Yeah.
So what made you in particular feel that you were going to be the one to be in this position?
Yeah. So when we were in uni, first year, first sem, one of our lecturers, she's now a partner at a prominent law firm. I think she's the managing partner. Her name's Pamela Aguirre. She sat down with us and she told us, because I was in the module 1 class, and this has shifted, but the university system in Kenya used to be that there was 2 sets of university students, at least in public uni, right? There was like high performers, straight in, your government sponsored, but there was also self-sponsored. Still high performers, high grades. Some people actually got into both programs and selected one against the other for certain reasons. But I was in the module 1 class, and typically that is bright students, but then who come from regular Kenyan households, right? Not privileged and not exposed as much as our counterparts in the other class. And one thing she told us is, you guys are smart, you're brilliant, your papers say so, but you don't have street smart. And what you need to realize is that the world is not technically built for you. You have to push further for you to survive and to make it. And she recommended a book that I still love to date. It's called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And the book essentially says, find a niche, find a space for yourself to stand out and be so outstanding that the world conspires for you to find space or for you to thrive in. And so that's what stood out for me. Like, I took that so seriously, and I actively tried to identify and seek spaces where there was a mishmash of both and I could hang out with.
I love that. That
techies.
is such a powerful quote, and I'm taking it to my grave.
Yeah.
Now that you've mentioned it, like creating space for yourself and opportunities is so important in your just life and career growth.
Yeah.
I think especially being someone who is in the startup world, very different from the corporate space.
Yeah.
I think you're always forced to think about ways you can be unique or
Yeah.
stand out from what your competition is doing. And
Absolutely.
quite arguably, one of a healthy way for you to look at life, because if you're stuck in one way of thinking or this is what I'm supposed to do, then you might limit yourself, and there's so much more out there that you can discover about yourself. And I hope that for me, this podcast and my technique in communications, even though it's not something that I have seen in my friends or people I've been in class with,
very
but
niche.
there's something special about this niche.
Yeah.
I'm trying to create space for myself in. So we digress. So now you've decided you want to specialize in IP and sorry, I forgot what else
IT
you said.
into
IP.
yeah.
And IT. So what's next now after uni?
Yeah. So actually, just before uni, this was the time that the Silicon Savannah was booming. You know, we used to have a lot of events and a lot of activities at the iHub. I know they've rebranded and they're relaunching soon, but those days the iHub was the iHub, you know. And so we'd spend a lot of time at the iHub and at NILAB. There'd be a lot of activities. You meet a lot of techs, a lot of techies, a lot of devs. You get to learn the difference about the front end versus the back end. And I remember I'd drive all the way, because I was living in Parklands on campus. I'd drive all the way, go to Ngong Road, struggle, you know, hustle there, and then come back to school. But then you keep learning and you meet such amazing people in the process. And so I found that there was a gap, right, between the law and tech. The people, they were not speaking to each other. At the time, I actually remember the only lawyer who was proactively working in the ecosystem was Oles on Twitter. Well, he's now Dr. Mugambi Laibuta, but on Twitter his name is Oles, and he used to do training for bloggers and techies at the time. But there was a gap and there was space for that. So while in uni, I worked very actively towards courses that would allow me to focus on intellectual property and IT law. And those are the courses I did in uni. And then when we had an opportunity to work in different organizations, they call it public interest, where you have to serve a public interest entity. I went and worked for the government of Kenya. So I worked at the ICT Authority to work on the ICT side, and then I worked at the Kenya Copyright Board to work on the intellectual property side and the copyright side of things.
Wow.
Yeah.
You have always been smart all your life, June.
Oh, thanks.
just from the trajectory of your stories and opportunities that you and spaces you found yourself in, it's very admirable to hear.
So finished uni while I was in...
So this was while you were in uni when
yeah.
you were doing this.
Because
So
that was coursework.
That must have been mentally...
Yeah.
Or was it just part of the course that you were doing?
It was.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're being strategic because you know you're not going to get a first class. Listen, in law, we don't get first classes. I mean, people do. But from the University of Nairobi, first class in law was not, you know? So you're aiming for your second class upper, right? So you're being strategic with the electives you pick and the courses you pick. So I was very strategic in that sense. And I was like, oh, the tech ones will help me pass better. So that's what I focused on.
That's what you focused on. I was just going to ask, okay, now you're about to finish uni.
Yeah.
Did you get a job opportunity while in uni or after? I mean, you were still doing this.
But even then, just before I get into post-uni, while I was in uni, I discovered that there was a lot of fellowships, a lot of trainings, a lot of opportunities for students. And that's actually how I got into ICANN for the first time.
Wow.
Because we still run a program that's targeted at young students from across the world. We have meetings that happens 3 times a year across the globe. And every time there's a meeting in that region, we take students so that they can come into the ecosystem, learn what ICANN is, how ICANN works, and the like. And this was in 2015. So that was my first interaction with ICANN as a student under this program that we call the Next Gen program. So I actively sought those opportunities and applied for those while I was still in uni. I actually remember on the day I graduated, I graduated in the morning. We had the celebration with the family, and right that evening, I traveled to Mexico for a conference on internet governance and how the internet is managed. And not many people at my time were doing that, but I did find people in that space that were doing the same thing.
Are there certain websites that you knew what to search, or like what was searching like for you? Were you like writing down a list of these are the ones I want to apply? Was it rigorous, or were you just like I'll apply for one or two or three?
So it's interesting because my entry even into the space, at least like the tech policy space, was through one person. Her name is Grace Bomu. So I reached out to her. I found her email online. I think she'd done some research on IT law. I sent her an email. I said, hi, my name is June. I'm a student. I'm really interested in learning about this IT law thing. And she said, we're actually hosting an event called the Kenya Internet Governance Forum. Come and learn. And so that's how I got to learn about that opportunity, but even the surrounding opportunities in that ecosystem.
Back to the principle of opportunities when luck meets preparation, right? It feels like
right place,
you are
right
still
time.
right place, right time, and making connections is just as simple as that. It's just writing an email, going to an event, maybe talking to one person. Cold emails, like
So then, right after uni, like, it's exactly what you said, talking to one person. So when I went for this event, one of the people I met was my lecturer in uni. He taught us IT law. His name is Stephen Kiptines. And he was at the Internet Governance Forum because he was one of the first lawyers to practice IT law in Kenya. I walked up to him. I said, hi, my name is June. I did your class in uni. And I'm curious, because he runs a law firm, are you guys interested in interns? And he said, well, we'll see. Like, we can think about it, but send me your email. So cold email, like you said, cold call. Send me your CV, and I'll take a look at that. And that's how I got an internship at that firm.
Wow.
Yeah, so right after uni, I had worked at Kikobo for a bit, and I was just wrapping up my internship at the time, and then transitioned into the law firm. So that's why I did my internship and my pupillage while I was at the Kenya School of Law.
Wow. And how long were you in Mexico for the ICANN thing? Because I know this is also relevant to the story we're about to get into.
Yeah, a week. It was just
a week for the conference
for the
thing.
Internet Governance Forum.
I was just asking because I think for context, we've mentioned here and there about ICANN, but I don't think we've given context of what it is.
Yes.
So I know we'll talk a lot more into it, but maybe you can tell our audience what ICANN is and what you guys do.
Yeah, so ICANN stands for the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. We are known for using a lot of acronyms, so I always have to remind myself to take a step back. ICANN's mandate is a global mandate. So we manage the technical identifiers of the internet on behalf of the world. We are headquartered in LA, but we do have a presence and an office in Nairobi, which is our African hub. In terms of what ICANN does, we are in the names and numbers business, right? So the double N at the end of ICANN stands for the names and the numbers. So think of domain names. So your .coms, .nets, .kes, .ngs, and we can get further into those. That's the generic names, and the country code names are the country specific ones. So we support in managing what we call the domain name system, the DNS, which is essentially a phone book for the internet. So when you think about it, several years ago, you used to cram everyone's numbers, right? Like at least the important people, you knew your mom's number, your dad's number, your friend's numbers.
Yes.
But now you probably don't even know those numbers offhand, right? Because of the phone book that exists. And so computers are the same. How the internet was built and that infrastructure was that computers do not understand names. They do not understand letters. They understand numbers. And so every single domain name, every single resource or device that's connected to the internet has a unique identifier called an IP address, which is an internet protocol address. And so if you're trying to access a website, for example, www.mytechstoryafrica.com, the computers do not understand it. So behind the scenes, you'll probably have a number that's something like 192.67.89.93. That's what the computer understands. So we manage that phone book on behalf of the world that translates those numbers between the names and the numbers.
Okay. Well, there you go. We'll get a lot more into ICANN. Before we get into that, I want us to talk through that journey between post-uni, you're doing your KSL or you're finished, to now doing your master's and your fellowship at the Harvard's Bichem. I'm trying to read. The names are a bit difficult, but go ahead.
Yeah. So a lot happened between then, and maybe I can just quickly run through those, right? So while I was at the law firm, our law firm was a boutique specialist law firm. Unlike most law firms at the time, and this has kind of shifted over the years, most law firms practice law traditionally, which is conveyancing, commercial, litigation, the regular stuff. But ours only focused on 4 areas of practice, which was intellectual property, technology, projects, and corporate governance. And so I was on the tech media telecoms team, and we had some of the best clients. Anyone who was in Kenya operating in tech and in the telco business was probably our clients. Everyone from Google, Microsoft, Wyok, Safaricom, internet service providers like POA, Liquid Telecom, anyone who was in the business and who was in the industry in tech at the time, we provided, or most of them, we supported and provided services to them. And so from that, I got really into the niche space of both tech and policy, did a bit of work then. And then I was headhunted to join an IP consulting firm, intellectual property consulting firm. It's one of the largest in the world, called Talal Abu Ghazaleh, based out of Jordan, but then with a presence globally. And at the time, they were trying to expand into Africa. So I set up the Kenyan office to support the IP work. So essentially, it's global brands that you're registering and ensuring that they're registered and protected in Kenya and across Africa. While I was there, one of the clients that we'd had at the law firm was Google. And I had worked on several Google matters and been seconded there, and an opportunity opened, which was a legal training opportunity. And so I applied for that. I got into that. I worked at Google for almost 2 years. Best job of my life, amazing people. You really get to learn a lot at the intersection of, legal counsel, products being built, passionately and advocating for Africa, So at the time, you might not relate to this, but YouTube Premium was not a thing for Africa. It was a thing for the rest of the world, and it would come upon our desks for us to decide and determine if it was legally viable in Kenya. And we really tried to advocate actively to have the same products and the same experiences that were available for users across the African context and across the African continent as in the rest of the world. And so that was really interesting. Worked there, loved it, 2 years, and then COVID happened.
And how long were you staying in these jobs that you were getting? So Google, you said it was 2 years.
Yeah,
before
almost 2
Google,
years.
How long was that?
Almost a year.
Okay, so
I was
you
at
weren't
the IP firm for like 6 months. Yeah, I may move.
Was that part of the plan? Like you knew you wanted to keep moving, or was it just not yet what you were looking for?
Yeah, yes and no, in the sense that for a long time, my belief and my thinking was that I need to have experience across the tech industry, right? So I needed to understand everything from infrastructure, when the fiber cable lands in Mombasa, how does it come into my house? What is the tower ecosystem? How does that work? When I get onto a device on my phone, what does that mean? Which CDNs am I accessing? Your Facebooks, I was very curious to understand the whole thread and the whole ecosystem. And so that was intentional in that sense. I also thought there would be value in learning from different organizations. So I've worked for civil society, I've worked for private sector, I've worked for government, I've worked for different places, even universities, academics, so that you kind of understand what is driving every single entity and what their interests are in the different spaces.
I mean, there's a myth or a truth that people say in the fear of, or if your reputation is just every 1 or 2 years you're moving, then you're not it takes away marks from you essentially from when people are hiring for particular roles. Is that true in your experience?
Not at all. I get a lot of jobs, especially because of moving, and I get a lot of opportunities. I actually do not remember the last time I did not have a role or a job, which is very privileged.
Wow.
I appreciate.
But it's a privilege that you've created for yourself. It's not coming
and it's
out
partly
of
because
nowhere.
of that moving, right? Because with every move you get value. So you learn something new, and anyone who's hiring you gets much more value from you as a human resource as well. The other thing that I like to point out is, one of the phrases I live by is loyalty is to yourself. Everyone is looking out for themselves, right? So even for you, think of what opportunities am I gaining from this? And also one of the reasons why I move is when I feel like I've hit the ceiling in terms of learning, there's nothing else I'm learning in this role, or I've already exhausted everything I could do, I think, then I'll seek for other opportunities. However, when I do speak to recruiters, I also tell them, which is true, sometimes it's a fixed term contract, it's a temporary contract, it's not a permanent role. Sometimes better opportunities come And most recruiters generally understand that.
Understand. I think people fail to recognize people as people when they're in that situation.
Yeah.
Just like, honestly, I was doing what was best for me
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah. And I don't think I've ever been punished for that. Financially as well, you make more money. And I think the statistics that I can share with you around people who stay in a role for a long time and how their income increases versus people who job hop and move around, especially with our generation.
Yeah, in this, and the space
Yes.
that we're in, which is tech.
Yeah.
You're speaking to some people right now in the audience. You're speaking to me because, we're trying to debunk. That is such a strong belief that people have to this day, is that, staying in this one position, or when you're in that position, you kind of psychologically block your mind into thinking, if I don't have this chance, like, where am I going to next? Like, I'm not going to have a job.
Yeah.
And forget the reason why you got this job is because you were
add
qualified
value.
and you added value to this role, and you can always add value somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's just that fear of what next and how to even know what was next.
Yeah. And so while I was at Google, one of the conversations we'd had was I was supposed to move countries. So I was meant to move to Ghana to support Google's business in West Africa. I had massive plans. I was dating a Ghanaian at the time that I thought was the love of my life. So I was ready to move. And then COVID happened, which meant I could not move. I was out of a job because the contract transition was quite difficult. But luckily I was still at home. My mom did not throw me out, but it was very difficult. And I say that especially as someone who used to be anchored by work.
Yes.
I really value the work that I do.
Would you say it became you and most of your personality, work?
I hope not, but I think my friends might say so. My friends would probably say so, yeah. And so during COVID, I then joined a tower company, so American Tower Corporation, and what we do are boosters. That's what people call them, telecommunications boosters. And so for me, that was interesting because then you get to understand the tower business, how passive infrastructure works, how to draft contracts, how to write commercial agreements, how to manage and speak to vendors. Really, really good role. I learned a lot. I actually did so well in 6 months. I was promoted and had my transition. Had my role transition into full-time from a contractor in those 6 months. Really good role. I was the first data protection officer for the company. I was the first legal manager who was supporting public affairs,
What do we say?
I set up our LinkedIn page, which they recently closed because remember when I was at Google, I learned about digital and social media marketing.
Yes.
So I was very good at that. So I set that up for the business and the company and set up the stakeholder engagement infrastructure. And then grad school came calling.
What do you mean by grad school keep calling? It didn't come out of nowhere, did it?
It did not. I had always known I wanted to do a master's in law, LLM, in technology and IP law. The question was just where and how in terms of funding. And if I may segue, like the advice I give people now is follow where the money is. If you're not a rich kid, if you're not privileged, if you are, please go to whichever school you want to go. You can afford it. But if you're looking at opportunities, especially in the US or abroad, for education is expensive. They charge tens of thousands of dollars. It is not cheap. And so my advice is do not look at the school, look at the money. And so because I went on a partial scholarship, which was very difficult because at the time my savings were in Kenya shillings. And that was when the Kenya shilling was doing what a shilling does. And so it was very expensive and it was very painful and it was very brutal. Compared to some of my colleagues who had full scholarships, they had full rides, like MasterCard scholars. Them, I remember they even got allowances, like your tuition is fully paid, your accommodation is fully paid, you have a stipend and an allowance, you're bought for a laptop, you're given money to buy textbooks because surprise, unlike universities in Kenya, in the US, they buy the whole freaking textbook. And every unit, every course has at least 2-3 textbooks. That's at least $200, $300, $400. Like,
wow,
brutal.
Is it not digital now?
We did have libraries and access to the library, but it was difficult. It was not the same because for every class you have to do your coursework and course reading. And yes, university here is structured that way, but I went to the University of Nairobi and we had the material. Do not ask how. Under copyright law, it is known as fair use. but we had material. In the US, they take their copyright laws so seriously. And every edition changes, You join a class in 2024, they expect you to have the 2024 edition. 2022 does not work anymore.
Yeah, in Kenya, even the one for 2000 end.
It's still relevant. You even update it yourself.
You update it. You do update it yourself.
You're like, oh, there's a new
this
case.
section. So this page
in 2024.
This is why I'm telling you, don't copy from the textbook. You copy on your exercise book. That's what you used to be told. Like the notes are wrong. We've moved, so this is the right information.
Yeah. So I always knew I wanted to go to grad school. It was just a question of which university to go to.
And which university did you end up going to?
So I applied to a number of schools. I did get in. So I got into UC Berkeley. I got into Cornell Tech, which was my dream. I was so sure I was going to go to Cornell Tech. I manifested it. I bought the sweatshirt. I bought the iPad covers. I was so sure I was going to Cornell Tech until I saw the fee structure. And it was not impressive at all.
Were you applying with the hopes that you will get
funding? Yes.
And why did it not end up that way?
They just did not have enough funding or enough endowment in a lot of the programs, or maybe it was spread through. But then remember, some of the schools are still private institutions, and the bottom line is we need to make money and keep the universities running. And so that simply did not make sense for me. So I eventually got into the American University, Washington College of Law, which is where I went to. And that's where I did my master's in IP and IT law.
Okay. And how was that experience like? And how did we now get into the fellowship as well before you got into ICANN?
Yeah. So when I was in grad school was actually quite tough. Partly because of the cost of living, because I was in DC. This is quite expensive. My rent was absolutely ridiculous. Well, it still is, but I guess if you're earning in DC money, then it does make sense. It was difficult. It was difficult financially. And at that time, at some point in the first semester, I realized, this math isn't mathing. The way things are working, I might not be able to complete this degree as I thought I would. And so I started applying for roles. So I actually applied and got a role at TikTok at that time. I was meant to move back home, go to South Africa. My mom completely did not understand it. She was like, what do you mean?
What do you mean you're just...
What do you mean?
One more year of your master's before you...
Yeah, jikaze.
Jikaze. Suffer. Indomie every day, but there's a goal.
And so what actually helped me from that, or at least saved me to finish my degree, was that South Africa took a really long time to get my work permit done, and TikTok just could not hurry it in time. And so at the same time, I had applied for a role at Facebook, which I actually got. And the role at Facebook was around public policy manager for connectivity and infrastructure for Africa. And so that's the role I took up. So while I was in law school and I was doing my degree, I had the Facebook role. It was a temp role I was holding for someone who was on maternity leave, but it was so amazing.
You needed it.
That role is what paid for me to go to school because Facebook has money.
That role is what paid for you to go to school.
It does.
And you know what I like about that? It just shows you how we needed to figure out a solution. I think in your mind, you were just thinking, okay, I need money to pay this school if I'm going to finish it, or a job.
Yeah.
And I think the role, it just feels like a manifestation almost of some sorts, right?
It
because
really did.
A lady all of a sudden is pregnant and going to maternity at the same time that you need the money.
Exactly, yeah. And I don't know if you've had George Ndirangu, journalist. But one of the things that he shares in his story is that he got his job at CNBC because the journalist broke his back at the gym. Like you're working out regular, you get a job. It was the same thing for me. She just happened to be expectant at that time, and she was on maternity leave, and there was a lot of projects happening, and it was right place, right time. Merge of both.
We did together. Awesome. I love that.
Yeah. So I worked at Facebook for those 6 months between Nairobi and DC. It was amazing. Great team of people. Learned quite a lot. But it was also at the time where Facebook was shifting from Facebook to Meta. And so there was a whole conversation around, okay, how do we shift the agenda and the focus, right? Because at the time, the team's focus was connecting the unconnected, which is a passion point for me. Because for me, I need deeply, and I believe deeply, that Africans should have the same experience on the internet and with technology as the rest of the world does.
Absolutely.
And so with the infrastructure and undersea cables, that was what we were working on. And so I did that, supporting Eastern and Southern Africa for those 6 months, and then graduated between that time. And then while I was in the US, one of the things they do as a student, because I was on a student visa, is you're given an allowance to work there. So they call it OPT, optional practical training, for you to implement whatever knowledge it is you have gotten in that country and in those roles. And
For
so
about a year?
Yes, for a year. So it varies, because if it's a regular course, it's a year. But then if it's a course in science, tech, engineering, math, STEM, you get like 2 years or 3 years, which is amazing for people in that field. But I had the 1 year option. And I was ready to come back home, you know. Nairobi has been home, born and bred, proper Nairobian through and through, you know, from Eastlands to West. I get the whole broad spectrum, because I did go
Nairobi
to school.
core.
Yeah, Nairobian proper, you know. And so at that time and I did not like the winter as well. Like I struggled with that, because hello, equator.
Not what we're used to.
You know? Yeah, so I asked a number of people, and I talked to people, and I asked, like, do you think I should come back home now, or should I stay on and work for this year? A lot of people said, like, if you have the opportunity and you can find a role in the US, take the experience, take the learning. It's just a year, and then figure it out after a year. See how you feel and what that looks like. At that time, I had started having conversations with Harvard University. And so the institute I worked for was called the Institute of Rebooting Social Media, but it was part of an Internet and Society Center in the US called the Bachman Klein Center of Internet and Society. And so in the tech policy space, Bachman Klein has been around for 26 years now. It was one of the spaces and ecosystems that allowed tech and policy to thrive right from when the internet was created and brought together. And I had done a course with them earlier when I was in uni. I always knew, these guys are doing amazing, fantastic work around the intersection of tech and policy and law. And so at the time I was joining, this institute had been set up trying to figure out what social media looks like, what are the issues there. And so they asked me, like, is there something you'd like to work on, and how can we structure it so that you come and join us? So that's what happened.
And how was that fellowship experience?
It was amazing.
Because especially you were trying to debate whether you want to stay in the US or you want to go back home.
Yeah.
Did it all work out in the end for you to do this fellowship?
Yeah. So for me,
you were also very active on LinkedIn, let me say, during that time period.
Yeah.
I would see a lot of posts from your fellowship.
Yeah. So the amazing thing with the fellowship is they created space for me, you know, because of my unique situation. The difficulty was, part of the difficulty was moving from DC to Boston. Nairobians will not relate, because you call a mover, you sleep, you roll out of bed, the mover comes. Alice, I did not know boxes come flat, guys. I did not know. Boxes come flat.
So now you have to open them and then...
You build it yourself.
There's a lot of build it yourself culture in abroad.
Even your bed, you build your own bed. I built my own freaking bed.
You buy things from ICAAN and then you go build.
In a box, flat like this. I was so shocked. I texted my mom and I told her, boxes come flat? Because I had to get moving boxes, right?
Yeah.
And then we had to get a U-Haul. I had a friend who helped me drive down from DC to Boston. Man,
How long
it was
is
brutal.
The drive?
It was brutal. We did 2 days. We had like a stopover. You can typically do it in a day, but we did a day and a half or so.
Wow.
Oh gosh. I realize the things you see in movies are real.
They're
you
real.
know,
They're
you see people in moving
people's
trucks and you're just like U-Haul. Like,
what is this? Yeah, no, you need one.
Yeah. But the institute was amazing, you know, because it was my own research. They asked me, what would you like to work on, which is what I picked. Very clearly for me, it had to be around Africa, it had to be around technology. So in that case, it was social media. It had to be at the intersection of law and policy. So that it was around how are social media companies regulated and operate across the African continent, and what are the liability issues that come out of that. And so I did the study focusing on 48 African countries, highlighting and mapping out every single law that touches on freedom of speech, internet access, technology, telecommunications for the whole country, mapping out their GDPs, you know, whether there's correlations between what a country's main source of production is versus how they use and interact with social media, looking at their democratic matrices, you know, is a more democratic country more likely to regulate social media less? Have there been internet shutdowns, social media shutdowns? At the time, actually, I used to tell people proudly, Kenya has never had a shutdown, as we don't do that. Can't relate. How things have changed.
Had than
Yeah, how things have changed. Mauritius
Yeah.
also had a shutdown yesterday, you know.
Wow.
And so it's interesting to get those facts and that information, because then it also influences policy decisions that are made
It
by both the
does.
companies and lawmakers.
It does. And it's so interesting. I want to ask you a couple of the key points that you figured out while doing your
Yeah.
research. But before that, I just wanted to say how relatable it is hearing you talking about your thesis. I think I had mentioned this to you before. My undergrad thesis was on attitudes of university students towards policies that govern social media narratives.
Nice.
And so it just feels yours is just a pro max
Yeah.
level of it was my first research project.
Amazing.
So
What were your
research-
findings?
My findings were that if there are few policies that govern social media narratives in Kenya, or at least when I was trying to find, I couldn't find as much. And two, I was also finding that even if they were to exist, nobody knows of them,
Yeah.
especially students. Nobody knows that if you post this.
Yeah.
And also the impact of the sentiments that people also have when it comes to the impact of the narratives that then are pushed. I also talked a lot more on election rigging and all, when this UK-based company was
Yeah.
I
Cambridge
forgot it.
Analytica.
Cambridge Analytica. I did a
Yes.
lot of deep dive onto that and the
Yes.
impact on people without people necessarily knowing. So yeah, my two main findings were there even if they're very few, and two, there's just lack of awareness of the existence of
and
these
the policies.
policies.
Yeah. And I'll tell you for sure, like all the tech companies have actively been trying to push for more awareness, you know. Everyone's trying to show like these are the guidelines we've set, these are the regulations, these are the rules, this is the policy. And so they're really trying to push more awareness of that. But it definitely has not been perfectly done.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a better, maybe if what they're doing now, maybe they need
Pro
to
Max.
do some Pro Max.
Yeah.
Something different. If the strategy isn't working, then how? Because I did
Yeah.
my research like 4 years ago, and I still don't feel
Yeah.
there has been a breakthrough. Okay,
Yeah.
4 years is strong.
Yeah.
3.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, I hear you.
But what are some of your findings about the impact across Africa and
Yeah.
the research that you did?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. First and foremost, like Africa is mobile fast, you know, and like the US and in the global minority, as I like to call it, I don't call it global north because we are the majority in the rest of the world. We're mobile fast, you know, so whatever access it is you're getting onto the internet, it'll be on your phone, versus the US, which for a long time was PC fast. That
Yeah.
was one.
Yeah.
Second, I could find correlations between the internet connectivity of a country, mobile penetration versus how many users they'd have on social media, you know. We'd also assess and see if there were complaints or take down notices that were issued by other governments or private individuals towards the social media companies. At the time, then Twitter used to publish a comprehensive transparency report, you know, which would say we got 12 requests from Kenya. They were from the government of Kenya and they were law enforcement related. Or we got 2 requests from private individuals, court cases that were around divorce, etc., like they were trying to get information against their partners or their spouses and the like. So it was very interesting. Then it was interesting to also see the dynamic between the regions, you know, so between, well, quote unquote, how do you rate or decide what country is East Africa, what's West Africa, what's Central Africa, what's South Africa, right? Especially for the countries that fall in between. So you could see the confusion and the nuances and the boundaries and how those were set up.
Yeah.
The other nuance was around language, right?
Oh, yeah.
And one of the difficulties we actually had with my research is I only speak English, but we do have a big portion of the continent that speaks French.
Absolutely.
So getting Francophonie speakers and lawyers to translate the legalese for you, and then Portuguese was also something else altogether. And so that was difficult and that was a challenge to deal with. Access to law reporting as well, because some countries make decisions like there are certain Southern Africa countries where the president will go out on the road and say, we will close Facebook, we will shut it down, you know? And then you ask, okay, where's the legal document? Where's
do
the
this action?
directive? There wasn't, you know, and so that was a challenge as compared to like some of the other countries. You'd actually find like some countries do really well in terms of law reporting. You can easily go into a database, access all their laws, get all the updated information. That was helpful, but really good learnings there.
Yeah. No, Africa has its own challenges.
It
and
is.
most of those reasons are reasons that absolutely understand from the get-go. The language barriers that you're speaking of,
The legal
the
systems
legal
as well.
systems, or being able to just see the laws. When I was looking for those laws, we have a constitution, but these days it's a suggestion. So much happens in this.
Alice, we follow the constitution in this country. We are constitution abiding
country. Yes.
Sure.
But the next thing I want to ask you. That is a touchy topic. Recognizing some of your thought leadership moments based on just the history and listening to how amazing your trajectory has been. You've also been recognized as one of Africa's top 50 individuals leading in legal innovation. I just wanted to know, what does that mean for you as someone to be at the forefront of legal innovation across Africa?
I think for me it's impact, right? So identifying the gaps and seeing how we can leverage on that impact. Part of the benefit I had with working for all those organizations globally, but then also having the exposure and that multicultural experience, is you come back home and you see where the gaps are, you see where the pain points are, right? And so for me, it's constantly a question of how do I work towards increasing the impact for the common African? And there's different ways to look at it, right? So top of mind, I think meaningful connectivity is one of those things, So are you having the same internet access and the same speeds as someone else in other parts of the world? That's one. Do we have the right infrastructure? Because a lot of Africa still does not have. We are still lagging behind. The numbers do show that. Definitely the mobile penetration has increased. Internet penetration has increased. The number of people that we have, the population dividend Africa has, sets us apart, right? And so the question is, how do we create opportunities for them to thrive socioeconomically using technology as a factor? And so I look at that from the policy side of things, trying to ensure that we have the right policies in place, the right regulations, having the right conversation with governments. So that's one. The second is meaningful participation. How the internet was structured and how it works and technology works for a long time has been top-down. And not necessarily top-down, but it's been we build and then we spread it to the rest of the world. And so Africa, things are changing now, which is amazing because we're now building African products for Africa, which I think is fantastic. And we need to continue doing that. But that being said, there's still spaces where these decisions are being made. There's a global forum and a global level where Africa is not at the table. We do have experts in governments that act and speak on our behalf, but the voices are not being heard. There are so many issues that we have in the ecosystem that are uniquely African because of the history that we have had. And I need us to be in those spaces, having those voices, saying and flagging certain issues, As basic as AI governance, it's amazing now we have more Africans in the room actively speaking about it, which is amazing. So think of like your Linda Bonyos, Shiko Gitao, Tony Ndungu, there's people who are actively in those rooms and in those spaces and advocating.
We love that. Tony was here the other day.
I saw that.
He fails to mention that he has this trip a week later, that he's going to meet the big people in the room. And that was just...
Absolutely.
Just need to, and it's just his philosophy and his thinking of just do it and just speak on it. And even when he was, just side note, just fangirling Tony here for a sec, when I saw the video that he did record when he was in the room, also being very stern about Africa is coming and we are not being meek about, just being shy,
taking up
just
space.
Like taking up space.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes.
So we need more of that.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I love that. We do need more people in those rooms and that representation. I think I have a similar goal, just different fields of like, I strongly believe that technology has the power to make a socioeconomic impact across Africa.
It does.
And as we've seen, a huge part of that is the lack of awareness of the tech solutions of what are being built or the policies.
True.
And so that's one of the main reasons why I started this platform, is so that we have the founders come here and speak of the things that they're doing. We have people like you to say, look, we need more lawyers in these spaces and sort of make my impact through communication.
And you're doing
in that
such a fab
front.
job at that, by the way.
Thank you.
You are,
I'll try my
highly
best.
impactful. No, it is, because a lot of building happens in the background and you do not get to see it or hear it.
Exactly.
Which is actually the third thing that I think we need to do as Africans. Building and managing narratives. How do we tell our stories? And I know this is amazing for you because you're right at that intersection between tech and communication. We do not tell our stories well, which is very weird and awkward because we are an innately storytelling ecosystem and community. How do we get into those rooms and tell the unique African story, you know, the peculiar African story?
It's true.
Are we in the right spaces, using the right platforms, leveraging on those and telling those stories and having those impacts on it?
I agree. We need more impactful stories being told about our continent and what we do. I don't know if you've had the opportunity, and if you haven't, listened to Lupita Nyong'o's new podcast.
It's so good.
Mind Your Own.
I love it.
Every episode I'm hooked because it's a very amazing representation of African stories, and it's fun and it's vibrant and it's
so relatable.
You know, it's Kamau from, you know, a kiosk down here. It's whoever from Ghana who is creating an album, and you've maybe not heard his music, but maybe you should. And so more and more opportunities like that, I am definitely here for.
I agree with you. And it's interesting, Lupita even says when she met Trevor and they were doing that podcast, like she said, for a long time when she pitched her idea, people would ask her, who are you? Who's listening? Who are you building for? Like, do Africans and diaspora want to hear this thing?
Like, no, Africa has many people.
Exactly.
They
billion.
Want to listen. And I'm pretty sure they're listening because I don't know why you think because it's an African story and I also conditioned into our minds almost. Like, oh no, it's an African movie. You already have your expectations low. And so changing that expectation, it has shifted. Like listening to Lupita's or, you know, African stories these days from the time of Chimamanda has been.
New book coming out in 2025.
I know you're excited.
We are. We are.
No, so really acknowledge that and just, I don't know if you were done with your point or if I can.
No, it's fine. But maybe just to add like two things, right? Number one, the impact that the African diaspora are having, especially in the tech space.
It's true.
It's amazing to see. So there's, you know, the celebrities and everyone that we see, but even the regular diaspora who works in tech, they're doing such a phenomenal job in plugging back home and onto the continent.
And they always do that.
They do, you know, and they create space for each other. Like the number of people who I know who have gotten into big tech through the networks and referrals, it's amazing.
Yeah, shout out to the tech diaspora community. I think they are very close-knit. These are, all of them are, especially in the UK. I'm not sure about the US presentation, but the UK, whenever I see the people, the communities, it's just so vibrant. It's so, they're looking up ways to take it back home, which is essentially what we always hope. They are getting lost and then forgetting to take it back home.
And it's so amazing because this generation is doing it socioeconomically as well, right? For a long time, like it would just be, like you send the small things, but now it's creating opportunities for others to earn.
Invest in Africa.
It's amazing.
Talk to Africans,
It's amazing.
Beautiful to see the evolution. And my follow-up question as we get to closing off this episode, as being this influential person and getting to the part that you are today, I want to ask two things, almost similar questions. But one, what advice do you have to someone who's almost maybe seeking to get into this kind of position that you are in? But two, aside from a person as a woman, like your experience overall, like what is some of the advice you would give to women out there about representing themselves more in such spaces?
That's a great question. Well, two great questions. Let me start with the mantras I live by, right? For people trying to get into the same space and ecosystem, but also working towards, you know, whatever goals and dreams you have. Number one, I always say, be good at what you do, you know? Find the time, take the time to learn. I spend so much time at the iHub hanging out with tech kids to understand the difference between UX, UI, what Java is, you know? Like, I learned so much about the technology and I still keep learning, which is partly why I also move, right? So now I'm learning about the domain name system, what that looks like, what does that ecosystem and that space looks like. So learn and be good at what you do. That's number one. Number two is be kind. Just be a good person. Like, it's basic, it's bare minimum. That's how we are raised as Africans, as Kenyans. Be kind. You never know who's who. We actually have scenarios and situations where, as outside counsel or lawyers, you work in a law firm, the person in the company sometimes would be mean to you or rude to you or talk to you in a demeaning way. And then the next day you go and you're their boss. You know, like things shift. Or the number of times that we've had of even layoffs in the system, in the space, right? You reach out to someone because they work at Google, Facebook, wherever. You're like, oh, I'd like to have a meeting. They're like, for what? The next day they're laid off, you know? So just be a kind person, not because something bad will happen to you, but be a good person. And then the last thing is build a solid network, you know? Have community around you that vouches for you. Part of the reason why I decided to come back home was because of community, because I have amazing community here. So find a solid network of people that sees your value and that you add value into, and then leverage on that, because that always works. They actually say that there's a book I'd recommend called The Proximity Principle by Ken Coleman, but he says that it's weak ties that will enable you to move to the next thing in life. So think about it like when in this room, I say, oh, I'm actually looking for a graphic designer or something, or we are hiring for an account manager role or something. It's rarely the person close to you, like your close-knit circle, your family or friends, that creates those opportunities. It's the outside. And I'm sure you've had that experience as well, right?
I'm currently experiencing it right now. Someone I met at the festival and 2 years ago barely had a conversation, but it was important enough for us to follow each other on social media.
Yeah.
But now, I think 2 years down the line, knowing that after following each other, oh, okay, maybe you do this. You're actually good at this tech marketing.
Yeah.
I actually need that.
Yeah.
Are we able to work together on this?
Yeah.
And that's loose end that is tied,
big
but
ties. Absolutely.
it works. It works. And I would just add a point to what you've said is just being vocal about what you do.
Yes.
Because that loose tie is only made when you say, oh yeah, actually during my work when as a graphic designer, it's like just naturally always put it in. Yeah, you know, actually when I was recording my tech podcast with the guest, that was always, because you just never know who's listening.
Absolutely. And the next question is, tell me more about your podcast. You know, what do you talk about? So that's where opportunities come. So that's my advice for anyone trying to get into this space and career. It's worked for me. I'm happy with it. I'll keep doing it because it's tried and tested. For women, I have been very privileged to work with amazing women. I've had women lawyers around me who are older, more experienced, who are wiser, pour into me so passionately and so well. Shout out to the Lean-In ladies. We have a Lean-In group of lawyers in technology, ladies in technology, amazing cohort, you know, which is legal counsel from Microsoft, Google, Oracle, Facebook, Safaricom, Jamii Telcom, Wananchi Online. Think of whoever's in the space and in the ecosystem.
How can someone get into that space in case they're interested? Just...
Well, I can share a few links because there's a number of like groups and spaces and ecosystem communities for that. Okay. So that's, you know, leverage on that. However, do not be naive, right? Which is what I was for a very long time. Not everyone is rooting for you. Not everyone is minding your business or minding your success. Not everyone will be happy for you. So just be aware of that, because I wasn't. I assumed it's happy-go-lucky, you know? So be aware of that. But
could you get a bit more into detail of what you mean by that?
Yeah, so there are platforms that are created, right? And a lot of us pull each other up, right? Where there's opportunities, the speaking gigs. I think I'm a great connector, master connector. Like if I find opportunities, I see a lot of synergy between people and organizations. And so I love doing that. And I've had women around me do that. But not everyone is like that, whether male or female, you know, it doesn't matter. Just be aware of that and do not be as naive to think that everyone is working towards your best interests. So be aware of that. And then read more, you know, and learn more. This work-life balance conversation that we still continue to have, find spaces that allow you to get into and thrive. One of the spaces I'd shout out is like African Women in Tech, which I sit on the board advisory for. We're building a space and an ecosystem for women in the ecosystem to come in and thrive in, you know. So find those spaces, take advantage of those.
Can I be in that space?
Yes, say less than.
Thank you.
Yeah. But find those spaces, be in those rooms, listen to those people. The system is not for us, you know, but things are changing. We get into those spaces and we make it for us, and we find spaces for us to get into and thrive in.
Thank you so much for those insights. I think that those could help a person or two kind of
Yeah.
figure out, okay, if I'm going to be in these spaces, how to do it. And I think that's just been the general theme of this entire episode. The last thing I'm going to ask you finally is about ICANN. What are some of the projects that you guys are excited about? What are some of the
Yeah.
things that you want to share with us that people need to know
Yeah.
about what you guys do and what you do as well?
Yeah, thanks for that. So, as the global stakeholder manager for the region, we are actively trying to identify opportunities where Africans can thrive in and actively engage within the ecosystem. We keep saying the domains business is a money business. You know, it's a business. People make money from it. Unfortunately, because of the history of the internet, how it was set up, how infrastructure is even placed at the moment, Africans have not been active in that ecosystem and that space. And so we're trying to do a number of initiatives and a number of projects around that to get more Africans into that space because people are making money. Think of your .coms, you know, .com has millions of domain names. One domain name is $10. There's money to be made there. And so a number of projects are coming up on those. I'll just quickly talk about 3. The first is where we get talent and bring them into the ecosystem through capacity development programs. So like I said, I joined ICANN as a next gen, which is next generation, because it was noticed that there could be a gap because, again, people who are in this space have been there for longer. They were probably when the internet was being built and the new rules were being made. So the question has been, how do we ensure that there's longevity and there's transition and a good talent pipeline for that ecosystem and that space to continue. So we are actively doing that. I'll share some links, but there's a next gen program we have for not only Africans, but for students in different regions across the world. There's one for young professionals as well that we call fellowships. So we'll bring you into an ICANN meeting where you get to learn what this industry is about, what the ecosystem is about, and get to leverage on those. And then we also have a program under what we are calling the Coalition for Digital Africa that is trying to build technology for Africa and enhance connectivity for Africa, where we do a number of capacity development programs, including like for country code top level domains, which is CCTLDs. So the people who manage your .ke, .ng, .rw, and the like, just so that they're up to par with the other registrars and organizations that manage the other domain names. Second is what we're calling the next round of new names. So every domain name, www.mytechstoryafrica.co, the last .co or .com or .net is a top-level domain name. And so there's 2 types. There's what we call generic top-level domain names, so your .com, .org, .net.
Yeah.
And then there's your country code ones, .ke for Kenya, .za for South Africa, .tz for Tanzania, and the like, that are managed differently. Over the years and with the infiltration of the internet and penetration across the world, new names have come up. So before you could not get .africa, for example, now it's available. You can have a website, www.juneokal.africa. You could have .capetown.joburg. We're actively trying to see if we can get a .nairobi for Kenya. Imagine like with the marathon, like the Stanchot Marathon, www.marathon.nairobi, you know, or .safari for, think about it, like any country that has safaris, whether it's in Southern Africa, Botswana, South Africa, Kenya. Imagine if all these tour and travel companies had .safari, how much money you could make out of that. So trying to showcase that opportunity that currently exists and that is currently opened for people to apply and get new names under that.
I was going to ask you about the programs you spoke of earlier. Are there specific fields of people that you're focusing on, or can other people in other fields join in? For example, I know perhaps you're looking for software engineers, IT design, or law, but is it across the board? Is there opportunity for everyone to sort of maybe get something?
Absolutely. It's open for everyone. Like the students program, as long as you're curious enough, want to learn about the internet, we do put out applications and you're asked a number of questions like, how do you think this would impact you? What would you like to do with this knowledge? How would you like to impact your society? So it's open to anyone and everyone. That is all open and accessible. It's not restricted.
Okay.
The last one is just around meaningful participation, right? ICANN and in internet governance, how the internet that you use is governed. it's a global platform. And so anyone and everyone is welcome into that ecosystem. We're still trying to get more Africans in that space to actively engage and participate in. And so ICANN, for example, we host 3 meetings in a year, different parts of the world. We just had an amazing one in Kigali in June. And thank you to the government of Rwanda. They did a fantastic job, and they're doing phenomenally well in terms of technology and the ecosystem.
I love them. They were my second country to do
I know, I saw that, and that was really well done. Yeah, you had a blast in Kigali.
I had a blast, but I was just trying to figure out how to do all this video editing and production that we have here in Nairobi there, but a very good challenger that I had. I'm hoping to go to ICAAN next year. So
amazing.
Digress. Continue.
So we have meetings that are open to anyone. You can come in and ask, why does the internet work the way it does? Why is my domain name not loading? Where is the problem? You can ask whatever questions it is you want to ask. So ICANN meetings are one platform. Another platform is what we call the Internet Governance Forum, which is open to everyone. There's one that happens in Kenya, hosted by the Kenya ICT Action Network, open to anyone. There you come and you sit down and you ask the Ministry of ICT or the Communications Authority, did Safaricom throttle the internet on June 2024? You ask those questions, right?
Need to be asked in the right forum.
Exactly. Or what's the value in, and those are the forums to ask those questions.
Exactly.
What's
not
the value?
Twitter all the time, and
exactly.
What else can we do beyond the social media?
Absolutely. And you get your answers because it's an equal playing field. Like, why is excise duty being increased from 15 to 20% for mobile devices at a time where we are struggling with unconnectivity, low connectivity,
exactly,
low bandwidth, slow bandwidth, and even basic economic issues as the price of bread increasing. So you have to find those spaces. So Internet Governance Forum is one. There's one that happens locally in Kenya, one happens regionally for East Africa, and an Africa one and a global one where it's an equal playing field. So finding those spaces and plunging yourself into those spaces to advocate for yourself and for your people, I think it's quite impactful.
I think what I'm hearing is that there's so many opportunities, but less people taking initiative to take up those opportunities.
Absolutely.
Which is so interesting because I think it was last week I was having a guest recording and I was having someone speak on how there's so much opportunity, there's so much money, there's a big budget, but we just don't know who to give it to.
Yes.
And
we've had the same problem.
In like a month, having that conversation 3 different times with people, it just comes to show me that we need more people to occupy these spaces. We need more brand awareness, and brand awareness, as you've mentioned, is you also have to seek as an individual to go and look for those spaces. Okay, if you have an issue with how things, like you said, was there an internet shutdown?
Yeah.
Instead of complaining on Twitter, okay, where else can we go?
Yeah.
And this is how.
And there's forum that exists for that. There's places you can write to and ask questions.
Yeah. So I really do like that, and I hope this encourages more and more people to just take the extra leap of faith. Not saying leave your 9-to-5 job, but if that's what it takes for you to do so that you get a fellowship or, do something that can be more impactful on a bigger scale, I am here for it. And I absolutely thank you so much for coming and sharing your narrative. I am in awe of your work. I've always known you, but I've not known all of the work that you do. So I admire you and how far you've come. And I know a lot of people who are listening are feeling the same sentiments that I am. So anything else you want to say before we close down this episode?
No, thank you. Thank you for having me, Alice. And I think you're doing a fantastic job with this platform. Please keep pushing.
Thank you so much, guys. If you reached this far into the episode, make sure that you subscribe from wherever you're listening from, whether that's on YouTube, Spotify, or any of the major listening platforms. We have a new website underway. We will be working with June, but for now, you can check out our website at www.mtsafrica.co, and you can subscribe to our newsletters at mtsafrica.co/join. Thank you so much, and I shall see you in the next one. Bye-bye.